everyone. Welcome to another episode of Deep Dive Knowledge Talk. Hello everyone. I am a reviewer and technical journalist interested in a recent scientific report on the importance of configuration files in machine learning projects. I am here today to interview the author of this report and ask some specific questions about its findings. First, can you explain what exactly is a configuration file and why it is so important in machine learning projects?
A configuration file is a text file that contains a list of settings and options that control the behavior of a program or system. In machine learning projects, configuration files are used to specify the hyperparameters of the model, such as the learning rate, batch size, and number of epochs. These parameters can have a significant impact on the performance of the model, so it is important to be able to set them easily and reproducibly. Configuration files also make it easier to manage multiple versions of a model. For example, you might have a configuration file for a development version of the model, a staging version, and a production version. This allows you to easily switch between different versions of the model without having to manually change the code. Overall, configuration files are an important tool for managing machine learning projects. They make it easier to set and reproduce hyperparameters, and they help to keep track of different versions of a model.
Thank you for that explanation. Can you tell us a bit more about how configuration files are typically structured and what kind of information they contain?
Configuration files are like instruction manuals for computer programs. They contain specific values and settings that tell the program how to run. Imagine you have a toy car. You can set the speed, the direction it moves, and how long it runs using a remote control. A configuration file is like that remote control. It lets you control how the program behaves by setting different parameters. In machine learning, you need to define things like the size of the data you're using, the algorithm you want to use, and how long the program should run. A configuration file helps you set all these values easily.
Can you elaborate on the advantages of using YAML as a configuration file format in machine learning projects?
YAML is a straightforward and easy-to-understand configuration file format that has several advantages when used in machine learning projects. Simplicity. YAML syntax is human-readable and easy to write, making it accessible to individuals with diverse technical backgrounds. Flexibility. YAML allows for the REST study of various data types, including strings, numbers, arrays, and booleans. This flexibility enables the storage of complex configurations in a structured manner. Extensibility. YAML supports comments, which can be included to provide additional information or explanations within the configuration file. This enhances the readability and maintainability of the code. Portability. YAML files are text-based, allowing them to be easily shared and used across different studies and operating systems. This portability simplifies collaboration and code sharing among team members. Standardization. YAML adheres to a well-defined specification, ensuring consistency and interoperability between different YAML parsers and tools. This standardization helps avoid compatibility issues and promotes the seamless exchange of configuration data.
Can you provide a practical example that demonstrates how a configuration file streamlines the process of modifying hyperparameters in a machine learning model?
Let's say you're working on a machine learning project to predict whether a patient has a certain disease based on their medical history. You've trained a model and want to experiment with different hyperparameters, such as the learning rate or the number of epochs. Without a configuration file, you would have to manually change these parameters in the code each time you want to try a new setting. This can be time-consuming and error-prone. With a configuration file, you can store all of the hyperparameters in one place. This makes it easy to experiment with different settings without having to modify the code. For example, you could have a configuration file that looks like this. Learning rate 0.01, epochs 100, batch size 32. To change the learning rate, you would simply edit the configuration file and change the value of the learning rate key. You wouldn't have to touch the code at all. This makes it much easier to experiment with different hyperparameters and find the best settings for your model.
Can you provide a specific example of how configuration files can enhance the reproducibility of machine learning experiments?
Configuration files are like instruction manuals for computer programs. They tell the program how to run and what to do. Without a configuration file, the program would not know what to do and would not be able to run properly. In a machine learning project, the configuration file can be used to set the parameters of the machine learning model. These parameters can include things like the learning rate, the number of epochs, and the batch size. By setting these parameters in a configuration file, you can easily change them without having to modify the source code of the program. This can be very helpful when you are experimenting with different machine learning models and want to see how they perform under different conditions. It can also be helpful when you want to share your machine learning model with someone else. By providing them with the configuration file, they can easily set up the model on their own computer without having to worry about modifying the source code.
Can you provide a practical example of how configuration files can be used to manage the resources allocated to machine learning models, such as CPU, memory, and GPU usage?
Configuration files have multiple uses in managing the resources allocated to machine learning models, such as processor usage, memory usage, and graphics processing unit, GPU usage. One of the main uses of configuration files is to define the amount of resources that a machine learning model can use. This is important to ensure that the model has enough resources to run properly, but not so many resources that it takes up too much of the system's resources and slows down other processes. For example, a machine learning model that is used to train a large dataset may need to use a lot of memory and processing power. In such a case, the configuration file can be used to specify the amount of memory and processing power that the model can use. Another use of configuration files is to define the type of resources that a machine learning model can use. For example, a machine learning model that is used to train a model on a large dataset may need to use a GPU to speed up the training process. In such a case, the configuration file can be used to specify that the model can use a GPU. Configuration files can also be used to define the parameters of a machine learning model. For example, a machine learning model that is used to classify images may need to use certain parameters to determine how to classify the images. In such a case, the configuration file can be used to specify the values of these parameters.
Can you provide a specific example of how configuration files can be used to manage the logging and monitoring of machine learning models, including the collection and storage of metrics and logs?
The configuration file can help manage how your machine learning model logs and monitors, including collecting and storing metrics and logs. To understand this, think of a configuration file as a recipe book. Just as a recipe book tells you the ingredients and steps to make a dish, a configuration file provides instructions on how to set up and run your machine learning model. By storing these instructions in a separate configuration file, you can easily make changes without altering the main code. This makes it much easier to manage and track different versions of your model, as well as share them with others. Similar to how a recipe book can guide you through cooking a meal, a configuration file can help you manage the logging and monitoring of your machine learning model, ensuring it runs smoothly and efficiently.
Can you provide a specific example of how configuration files can be used to manage the data preprocessing and feature engineering for machine learning models, including the handling of missing values, outliers, and feature scaling?
Configuration files allow you to manage data preprocessing and feature engineering for machine learning models, including handling missing values, outliers, and feature scaling. By storing these settings in a separate file, you can easily change them without having to modify the source code, making your project more flexible and easier to maintain.
Can you provide a specific example of how configuration files can be used to manage the collaboration and version control of machine learning projects, including the specification of merge strategies and branch protection rules?